But for the most part, we are making it harder on ourselves and on our children when we let them off the hook and when we want them to be our children rather than their own responsible person.
Welcome to the Simplified Organization Podcast, 15-minute conversations with real moms about managing our homes and family life cheerfully to the glory of God. We can actually enjoy housework and love being homemakers when we focus on truth and work with gratitude. And what is true of our homemaking is also true of our homeschooling, which is what we're going to talk about today. I'm Mystie Winckler, homemaker for 23 years, homeschool mom of 5 with 2 graduates, and author of the book, The Convivial Homeschool, Gospel Encouragement for Keeping Your Sanity While Living and Learning Alongside Your Kids. And today we have something slightly different for the Simplified Organization podcast. Today I have a clip from last year's kickoff workshop for Art of Homeschooling inside Convivial Circle. Art of Homeschooling is my course to walk you through your expectations and organization and rhythms in your homeschool. It's not about making the homeschool plan so much as about how to actually work your homeschool plan in the real life of an active family home. Particularly if you have teenagers or are coming up on those teen years, you'll find this episode very encouraging.
All right, we have a few people with teenagers where you're just barely getting into homeschooling. A 2-year-old and a 1-year-old is pretty much parenting, mothering all the time. It's really homeschooling pretty much is motherhood intensified. Like you're not outsourcing any of the day to anyone else. You start and you're doing everything alongside them and you have to teach them everything, and that's fine. But we would just gradually, incrementally, and constantly upward promote the children. And they would just get better and more responsible until they were independent and then grown and done. And now that I'm on my third 16-year-old, I would say in a way it is like that, but it doesn't feel like it in the moment. When you look back, you can see that it was a trajectory. But in the moment, it feels like there's a lot of jerking around and a lot of ups and downs. And when you hit somewhere between 11 and 13, it can feel like you are in maybe even free fall mode. And I've written several times before about homeschooling 12-year-olds. And I don't think that's talked about enough, which is the reason why I keep bringing it up, because it's important to have our expectations as moms in alignment. And there is a difference in the puberty years that we have to account for and we have to work with. It's its own distinct phase. And if we aren't prepared for it, it feels like our homeschool is in total failure mode, but it isn't. It's actually just incredibly potent if we harness it and if we are able to be impervious and not take our particularly 12-year-old boys' words personally, because they are making this actually very painful in many ways transition into adulthood. So there's the under 10 homeschooling, which by the time you get to 8, 9, 10, you're like, oh, we've got a rhythm. Homeschooling is so much fun. The things go together and we can homeschool all together in a big group. And it's amazing. Most days. Sometimes there might be fractions or whatever that make people cry. But for the most part, we're reading books, and talking about them and doing coloring pages or activities or whatever. And it's okay. If this is homeschooling, I can do it. Let's go. And you start to maybe get a little overconfident or just a little in the groove of a season of homeschooling that is finite. So we want to enjoy the different seasons of homeschooling. And there are the younger years, the elementary years, that are a special time that we can enjoy for what it is. But elementary, that season gives way to middle school, for lack of a better word. The goal in those middle school years is not to try to keep them at the elementary stage. We have to let them be what they are growing up into, and we have to begin calling them toward a higher standard. They are going through the physical, hormonal changes to become adults. And our current society is set up to minimize adulthood and even despise adulthood, really. When it comes right down to it, we tend to idolize childhood and diminish adulthood. We do not glory in responsibility in America right now. We talk about adulting as like a hard and difficult thing when it's what just everyone did without a problem for most of human history. So our bodies are set up to work the way God has always created them to work. And we can be a part of helping that natural, normal transition in encouraging it. Or we can play into the errors of our current culture and try to squash it and keep the kids down, really. And some kids are going to really lean into the irresponsibility during their middle school transition puberty years, partly because that is the air we're breathing right now. If you think to what Charlotte Mason is talking about when she's talking about education, one core difference that we have to keep in mind as we set our own expectations for what we are dealing with as educators, rather than what she is dealing with, is she's in a culture that expects duty and responsibility and honor and tradition. That's a baseline in the culture that she can assume, and adults have high standards and expectations for the behavior of children, even younger than even pre-puberty children. Expectations for responsibility and behavior were way higher. And so she can assume the backup of the culture for her education standards, because there's just this kind of general expectation that we want to fulfill our duty. And that is not the case in America. It's not even the case in Britain anymore, but definitely not America. And I know some of you, not everyone here is in America, but we do not have the backup of the culture. Holding our kids to a standard of respectable behavior is countercultural. And that means it's harder. It means it's harder for us to be sure that we're doing the right thing because we're being questioned and we're being different. Puberty and those transition years, if we look historically across cultures, across time periods, after puberty, children were adults. And so really this time period is a time of heavy transition and huge hormonal changes. We know that, big growth spurts. And it's a time where our kids are becoming their own person. And they're doing it in a time period that puts a lot of weight on personal identity while having stripped us of the normal procedures for becoming our own persons, right? Having roles and knowing where you belong hierarchically in a society gave you a foothold to know what your duty was and do it and receive commendation for doing. So it was very clear and everyone knew this is who you are, this is what you should do. And so you could step into that. You could rebel, but not only your parents, but society would push you back in line, do whatever they could to get you back in line. And we just don't have that anymore. And then on top of it, as parents, we can tend to want to keep our children down, to keep our children young, when we should be asking so much more of them. And they would thrive if we would ask so much more of them. There are developmental or different exceptions to that, but for the most part, we are making it harder on ourselves and on our children when we let them off the hook and when we want them to be our children rather than their own responsible person. And if you think about our goal as moms, particularly as homeschool moms, think about the goal. And this is something you'll be doing inside Art of Homeschooling, is thinking about the end, having a purpose and a mission. But what do we want our graduates to be and to do? And the struggle as a mom is that when they hit that 11, 12, 13-year-old brick wall, we are the brick wall and they're bashing all their energies against us. We need to be channeling that energy in the right direction, keeping them in childhood or just trying to end the conflict or squash the conflict. All of that energy and argumentativeness and tension and conflict that's just churning within them at that stage as they go through puberty is supposed to be working to make them stronger and more resilient and help them enter the adult world with poise and strength and stamina and with something to contribute. So they don't look or act at all like a graduate. And so that's where our panic moment is as moms. We look at the 12-year-old who's acting like a 3-year-old and we're like, okay, we have to go back to square one and I have to treat you like you're in kindergarten. That is completely how it feels. And that is how they are acting, but it's the wrong tactic. That is going to be counterproductive. It's that 3-year-old stage is a real stage, but that is the transition point from baby into ready for school, ready for education, ready for learning and development. It's a developmental stage that we have to shepherd them through as they leave one stage and go into another. Year-olds are actually gaining responsibility. That's a part of what's happening. We have to begin holding them accountable for their behavior in more and more ways because they start doing more and more things. So it's a transition time. And 12, or whenever it hits, 12 is my shorthand. It's like the average. It's a similar transition time. And so it can feel like, okay, I've got to treat them like a 3-year-old. But if you think about it, if you go back to an actual 3-year-old, what's going to help your children when they're 3? Is it going to be going backwards and treating them like infants? Or is it going to be helping them transition into a different stage of life? There's a big difference between toddlerhood and a preschooler. And 3 is a very distinctive parent intensive season as they make that transition. And it's the same with 12 on average. If we try to basically push them to regress and go back to the just obedience is all I want, don't talk back at all. They shouldn't talk, they need to be respectful. But here's the thing, a respectful 10-year-old and a respectful 18-year-old is a different relationship, right? We have to start showing them and teaching them and expecting of them what this new level of honor and respect is. Instead of saying, okay, clearly you didn't learn all those lessons I thought you had learned as a 10-year-old, so we have to go back and I have to treat you like a 10-year-old until you can do that again. And no, actually, they're transitioning out of that stage, and we have to help them learn how they should now begin interacting in more and more adult-like ways. It's tricky. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. But when we think about pointing them towards maturity, then that can help us with our expectations and just our understanding of what our job is in this season. Think to yourself, if another adult talked to me this way, how would I respond? You as the mom take the first steps toward interacting with them as adult to adult rather than as mom to kid. And especially with boys, this is really what they are asking for. They don't know it and they won't like it at first. But trying to hold on to the cuddly phase, and I am the soft place to land and the comfort and the snuggle, like that element of motherhood is not going to serve you well at this season. And this is why a lot of people give up homeschooling at 7th grade. It's a thing because it is a change in role that not all moms are prepared to make. If you are called to homeschooling, then this is God's path for your obedience and your sanctification as a mom. It's not something where you have to have it all figured out ahead of time. It's a path that you walk, always asking God for the next step of wisdom.
Well, that's all that we are going to clip from that workshop for today. But we are actually about to start the Art of Homeschooling again in our community with extra accountability and another live kickoff, meetups, chat spaces, extra checklists to help you kick off this new year of homeschooling with not only good rhythms and routines, but also a good attitude. We would love to have you join us. Just go to simplyconvivial.com and click the purple button in the upper corner to learn more about joining, or you can find a link in the description to find more about my course, Art of Homeschooling. The purpose of this course is to help you in your homeschool repent, rejoice, repeat.